My name is Dominic Reeves, but most people call me Dom. I am 38 years old, and 3 months ago my entire world shifted when I scratched off a lottery ticket at a gas station and discovered I had won an I per 52 million. My legs nearly gave out as I stared at those matching symbols, checking them over and over in disbelief. But as I sat in my car in that parking lot, catching my breath, I made a decision that would reveal everything I needed to know about my family. I would keep this fortune completely secret from everyone. If you're watching this right now, drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Before I share how this secret exposed the truth about every relationship in my life, hit like and subscribe to hear more raw stories about family, money, and the masks people wear when they think no one's watching. Before that Thursday afternoon changed everything, I was living what you'd call a middle-class struggle in Denver. I worked as a project manager for a construction company, putting in 55-hour weeks that barely covered my mortgage on a small townhouse in Aurora. Every month was a careful dance between bills, trying to save something while watching expenses pile up faster than my salary could match. My family tree was complicated, full of twisted branches and broken connections. My parents, Victor and Sharon Reeves, had divorced when I was 16 after my father's gambling problem drained their savings. My mother remarried quickly to Gerald, a controlling insurance executive who made it clear I was baggage from her previous life. My father, meanwhile, moved to Phoenix with his new wife, Tanya, a woman half his age who convinced him to cut contact with his old family. I have 3 siblings who each took different paths. My older brother, Preston, 41, became a successful real estate developer who never missed a chance to remind everyone about his wealth. My younger sister, Naomi, 35, married into old money but somehow always needed just a little help with her boutique business ventures. Then there's my younger brother, Dennis, 32, who struggled with addiction for years and had a talent for making everyone else's crisis about his own pain. My extended family wasn't much better. My uncle Theodore, my mother's brother, was a retired banker who hoarded his wealth while constantly lecturing others about financial responsibility. His daughter, my cousin Sylvia, inherited his arrogance but not his money sense, burning through her trust fund by 25 and now working as a yoga instructor while posting about abundance and manifestation on social media. The only genuine soul in the bunch was my uncle Raymond, my father's younger brother. Ray worked as a mechanic in a small shop, never complained about his modest income, and always showed up when someone needed help. Despite having the least, he'd been the only one to offer me a place to stay when I was between jobs 5 years ago. My relationship history with family money was a series of one-way transactions. When Preston needed investors for his first development project, I'd emptied my 400 neck to help him, believing his promises of doubling my investment. That money vanished into unexpected costs. When Naomi's boutique faced bankruptcy, I took out a personal loan for 80 that she swore she'd repay within 6 months. 3 years later, she acted like it never happened. When Dennis needed bail money, rehab funds, or one last loan to get clean, I always found a way, even if it meant eating ramen for months. The only person who knew how much these betrayals stung was my friend Terrence. We'd met at a construction site 7 years ago, and unlike my family, he understood loyalty. Terrence worked as an electrician, knew the value of hard work, and never asked for anything he couldn't repay. When his truck broke down last year, he'd tried to refuse my help until I practically forced him to take $500, which he paid back in full within 2 months. At work, I was invisible despite my contributions. My supervisor, Mitchell, routinely presented my solutions as his own during board meetings. My colleague Veronica would delegate her responsibilities to me, then take credit when projects succeeded. But I kept grinding, hoping recognition would eventually come. The lottery tickets were my quiet rebellion against this reality, my 20-weekly investment in possibility. Every Friday after work, I'd stop at the same Chevron station where Amit, the owner, would joke about my ritual. "Still chasing the dream, Dom?" he'd say, selling me my usual selection of scratchers and quick picks. My family mocked this habit relentlessly. Preston called it poor people's investment strategy. My mother said I might as well burn the money. Gerald lectured me about compound interest and mutual funds, as if I didn't understand basic math. But those tickets represented something they couldn't understand: hope for a different life. I dreamed of paying off my mortgage, of taking a real vacation somewhere beyond Colorado, of having enough savings that a car repair wouldn't devastate my budget. I wanted to go back to school, maybe get my MBA, transition into something more fulfilling than managing construction schedules for ungrateful clients. My life before the win was a careful balance of survival and small pleasures. I knew which grocery stores had the best sales on which days. I could stretch 50 of groceries into 2 weeks of meals. My 12-year-old Honda Civic had 180 miles on it, held together by YouTube repair videos and determination. I hadn't bought new clothes in 2 years, hadn't been to a dentist in 3, hadn't taken a real vacation since college. That Thursday started like any other. Mitchell had just stolen another one of my proposals, this time a cost-saving measure that would net the company $300 annually. I sat in the meeting, watching him receive praise from the executives while I remained invisible in the corner. After work, I stopped at a meat station, feeling particularly defeated. "Give me 5 of the platinum millions," I said, not even caring about the extra 5 I was spending. I sat in my car, scratching the tickets with a quarter. The first 4 were busts, as expected. The 5th one seemed different from the moment I started scratching. First symbol, a diamond. Second, another diamond. My heart rate increased. Third, diamond. Fourth, fifth, sixth, all diamonds. Then I scratched the prize amount, 52 million. I scratched it again, certain I was misreading. But there it was, $52 million. My hands trembled so violently I dropped the ticket twice. I locked my car doors, as if someone might somehow know what I held. A mid-station had security cameras, so I forced myself to drive away normally, pulling into an empty office park 5 miles away to process what had happened. I called the lottery office's automated line 4 times, entering the ticket number with shaking fingers. Each time, the robotic voice confirmed, "Congratulations, you have a winning ticket." That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I researched everything about lottery winners. The statistics were terrifying. 70% go bankrupt within 5 years, families destroyed, friendships ruined, some winners even murdered by relatives. One article particularly struck me, "The Lottery Curse: Why Sudden Wealth Destroys Lives." It detailed how winners become ATMs for everyone they've ever known, how family members feel entitled to shares, how relationships become purely transactional. By morning, I'd made my decision. I would claim the money anonymously through a trust, tell no one, and conduct an experiment. For years, I'd been the family's financial safety net, always giving, never receiving. What would happen if the tables turned? Who would help me if they thought I had nothing? I took a sick day and met with Patricia Stern, an attorney specializing in asset protection and estate planning. Her office occupied the top floor of a downtown high-rise, all glass and leather and intimidating sophistication. "Mr. Reeves," she said, examining my ticket with professional calm, "you're making a wise choice coming here first. Most winners make the mistake of telling people immediately." Patricia explained how we could establish a blind trust, claiming the winnings without revealing my identity. The process would take 2 weeks, during which I needed to maintain absolute normalcy. "The hardest part," she warned, "isn't managing the money, it's managing the secret." She was right. Sitting at family dinners, listening to Preston brag about his latest commission while knowing I had more money than he'd make in a lifetime required incredible restraint. Watching Naomi complain about her business struggles while secretly holding the solution to all her problems felt surreal. 2 weeks later, the money was mine. After taxes, I had roughly 31 million sitting in various accounts under the Evergreen Trust, a name Patricia suggested for its innocuous nature. I kept working my construction job, kept driving my dying Honda, kept shopping sales. The only change was internal. The constant financial anxiety that had lived in my chest for years finally loosened its grip. Patricia had assembled a team for me, a financial advisor named Harrison who specialized in wealth preservation, an accountant named Ruth who handled tax strategies, and an investment manager named Carlos who would ensure long-term growth. "Live on 3% annually," Harrison advised, "and you'll never touch the principal. That's 900 a year without depleting anything." And the number was incomprehensible. I'd been living on 65 a year and thought I was doing okay. Now I could spend more in a month than I used to make annually, and it wouldn't even dent my wealth. But I didn't want to become one of those statistics, another lottery winner destroyed by sudden fortune. Instead, I formulated my plan. I would create a controlled crisis, something believable but significant enough to require help. I would approach each family member with the same story, the same request, and document their responses. Only then would I know who truly cared about me versus who saw me as a resource to exploit. The story I crafted was this. The construction company was being investigated for fraud. All assets were frozen, and employees weren't getting paid. I needed 3-0 to cover immediate expenses, rent, food, utilities, until the legal mess was sorted. It was enough to be meaningful, but not so much as to be impossible for most of my family members to provide. I started a journal to document everything, creating a prediction column for each person. Preston would likely lecture me about not having better savings. Naomi would claim poverty despite her wealthy husband. Dennis would turn it into his own crisis. My mother would defer to Gerald, who would refuse. Uncle Theodore would use it as a teaching moment about financial planning. Only Uncle Raymond, I suspected, might actually try to help. I decided to start with Preston. We met for lunch at his favorite upscale restaurant, where he always insisted on paying to reinforce the power dynamic. As he talked about his latest development deal, I waited for my opening. Finally, over dessert, I dropped my fabricated crisis. The company's assets are frozen? Preston set down his espresso, his expression shifting from surprise to something I recognized. Calculation. How did you not see this coming? Weren't there warning signs? I explained that it had happened suddenly, that the FBI had shown up Monday morning, that nobody knew how deep the fraud went. His questions weren't about my well-being, but about the company's liability, about whether I could be implicated, about how this would affect my resume. I need some help, Preston, just 3-0 to get through the next month while I figure things out. He leaned back, his Rolex catching the light. Dom, you know I'd love to help, but all my capital is tied up in the Riverside project. I'm actually cash poor right now. This from a man who'd just spent 15-0 on a watch. Have you considered a payday loan? Or maybe driving for Uber in the evenings? The conversation shifted to his advice about my career mistakes, my poor financial planning, my failure to network properly. Not once did he ask if I was okay, if I was scared, if I needed emotional support. When the check came, he paid it with a Black American Express while explaining he wished he could do more, but his hands were tied. Next was Naomi. I met her at her boutique, a sparse space with overpriced clothes that rarely sold. She hugged me dramatically when I told her about the company, but her sympathy evaporated when I mentioned needing money. "Oh, Dom, you know Robert controls all our finances," she said, referring to her hedge fund husband. "I have to justify every purchase. If I asked for 3-0, he'd want receipts, explanations, probably hire someone to investigate you." She touched my arm with manicured nails that probably cost $200, "But I could maybe sell you some of my old designer bags. You could resell them online." Dennis's response was perhaps the most predictable. When I called him with my story, he immediately launched into his own problems. "You think you've got it bad? My sponsor just relapsed. My apartment has mold, and I'm pretty sure my boss is trying to fire me." He hadn't asked a single question about my situation. "Actually, since you brought up money, I could really use a loan myself. Just $500 until my next paycheck." I reminded him about the 3-0 he still owed me from his last crisis. "That's different," he said defensively. "I was sick then. You know, addiction is a disease, right? You can't hold that against me forever." The call ended with him angry at me for bringing up old debts while I was asking for help. My mother's reaction required a face-to-face meeting. I drove to the house she shared with Gerald in Cherry Hills, a massive colonial that screamed new money. She served tea in china cups I'd never seen before. A gift from Gerald's mother, apparently. "This is terrible, honey," she said when I finished explaining. "Have you talked to a lawyer? Gerald knows someone who specializes in corporate fraud." But when I mentioned needing financial help, her face changed. "You know I don't have access to that kind of money. Everything is in Gerald's name for tax purposes." Gerald entered the room at that moment, having clearly been listening. "Dominic, this is what happens when you don't diversify your income streams. I've told you repeatedly about the importance of passive income." He spent 20 minutes lecturing me about investments while my mother sat silently, occasionally nodding. When I asked directly for help, he was blunt. "We're not a bank, Dominic. Perhaps this will teach you valuable lessons about financial preparedness." Uncle Theodore's response came via email after I'd sent him a detailed message about my situation. It was 3 paragraphs about personal responsibility, the importance of emergency funds, and how his generation never would have found themselves in such a position. He ended with, "I hope this serves as a wake-up call about your financial habits. Consider this crisis a free education in real-world economics." Sylvia, my cousin, surprised me by actually meeting for coffee when I told her I needed to talk. She wore yoga attire that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget and ordered a 12 smoothie while listening to my story. "Oh, Dom, this is the universe telling you something," she said, clutching her crystal necklace. "Mercury must be in retrograde. Have you tried manifesting abundance? I have this amazing meditation app. When I mentioned needing concrete help, specifically money, she looked uncomfortable. Money is just energy, Dom. If you're vibrating at a frequency of lack, you'll only attract more lack. I'd love to help, but I'm actually in a bit of a situation myself. The studio cut my hours, and my car payment is overdue. The most painful rejection came from my father. After years of minimal contact, I'd hoped maybe this crisis would spark some paternal instinct. I managed to reach him after several attempts, explaining my situation while Tanya talked loudly in the background about their dinner reservations. "Well, that's unfortunate," he said flatly. "But you're a grown man, Dominic. You'll figure it out. We all have our struggles." When I specifically asked for help, he laughed bitterly. "You want money from me? After everything your mother poisoned you kids against me about, I've got my own life now. My own responsibilities." The line went dead before I could respond. After a week of rejections and excuses, I was emotionally drained despite knowing it was all a test. The experiment had confirmed my worst suspicions, but knowing and experiencing were different things. Each rejection felt like a small betrayal, even though I'd predicted most of them. Then my phone rang. It was Uncle Raymond. "Dom, I heard through the family grapevine about your work situation." His gravelly voice came through. "Why didn't you call me directly?" I explained I didn't want to burden him knowing his situation. He cut me off. "Burden? You're my nephew. Family helps family, no questions asked. How much do you need?" When I told him 3-0, he was quiet for a moment. "I can do 2-0 right now. It's most of what I've got saved, but you need it more than my savings account does. Can you come by the shop tomorrow?" The next morning, I drove to Ray's auto shop, a small garage that had seen better days but was meticulously clean and organized. He was under a car when I arrived but rolled out immediately, wiping his hands on a rag before pulling me into a hug that smelled of motor oil and Old Spice. "You look tired," he said, studying my face. "This thing really got you stressed, huh?" He led me to his tiny office, where he pulled out a manila envelope from a locked drawer. Inside was cash, 20s and 50s, worn bills that represented countless hours of labor. "I know it's not the full $3,000, but I can probably get you another $500 next week if you need it." "Ray, I can't take your savings," I said, genuinely moved despite knowing I didn't need it. "Sure you can," he replied firmly. "Know why? Because 5 years ago when I was nothing but a drunk feeling sorry for myself after Helen died, you were the only one who didn't give up on me. You dragged me to meetings, called me every day, made sure I ate. You saved my life, Dom. Money's just paper. What you did for me was real." I hadn't expected him to bring that up. After his wife Helen died of cancer, Ray had spiraled hard. The family had written him off, but I'd spent months helping him get sober. Not because I expected anything, but because it was right. "Besides," he continued, "I know what it's like to have everything frozen up. When Helen was sick, insurance wouldn't cover her treatments. I know that panic of watching bills pile up while you can't access your own money. You don't need that stress on top of everything else." He insisted I take the money, even trying to give me his credit card for emergencies. As I left, he called out, "And Dom, don't you dare think about paying this back until you're steady again." I mean it. Driving home with Ray's envelope in my pocket, I felt a mix of guilt and vindication. Here was a man who made maybe 40-0 a year, who'd given me most of his savings without hesitation, while my wealthy brother couldn't spare anything from his millions. That evening, Terrence called. "Yo, Dom, I heard about your company. Man, that's messed up. You good?" I gave him the same story I'd told everyone else. Without missing a beat, he said, "I've got about 500 I can lend you. I know it's not much, but it's yours if you need it." "Terrence, I can't take your money." "Why not? You helped me when my truck died." Friends help friends, simple as that. Plus, I know you're good for it. You're the most responsible person I know. His offer was particularly meaningful because I knew he'd been saving for his daughter's college fund. The fact that he'd sacrificed that for me spoke volumes. I thanked him but declined, saying Ray had helped me out. Good, he said. Ray's solid people. But if you need anything, money, place to crash, someone to drink beer with while you figure this out, you call me. Day or night. The experiment was revealing more than just who would help financially. It was showing me who actually cared about my well-being. The wealthy family members had immediately distanced themselves, worried about being asked for money. But those with less had offered everything they had. A week into my experiment, I decided to attend the monthly family dinner at my mother's house. I was curious to see how they'd treat me, now that word had spread about my financial troubles. The contrast from previous dinners was stark. Usually, I was ignored unless someone needed something. Now, I was radioactive. Preston avoided eye contact, focusing intently on his phone. Naomi made small talk about the weather, carefully avoiding any mention of work or money. Dennis glared at me, still angry about our phone call. My mother fussed over appetizers while Gerald held court about the economy, occasionally shooting pointed looks my way. It's a shame about your company, Dominic, Gerald finally said directly. Though I suppose this is what happens when proper due diligence isn't performed before accepting a position. These things happen, I replied calmly. I'm handling it by asking everyone for handouts. Dennis muttered, earning a sharp look from our mother. I asked family for help during a crisis, I said, meeting his eyes. The same family I've helped repeatedly over the years, but I'm learning who actually considers me family versus who sees me as a convenience. The table went quiet. Preston cleared his throat. That's not fair, Dom. We all have different situations. You're right, I interrupted. We do. Some of us have millions in real estate. Some have wealthy spouses. Some have parents with enormous houses. And some of us have nothing but still offer everything. The situations are definitely different. My mother tried to change the subject, but the damage was done. The rest of dinner was stilted, everyone eager to leave. As I helped clear plates, my mother pulled me aside. You're being very bitter, Dominic. This isn't like you. Maybe this is exactly like me, I replied. Maybe I'm just tired of pretending we're a close family when we're really just people who share DNA and nothing else. 2 weeks into my experiment, I made a decision. I called Patricia and told her I wanted to set up a trust for Uncle Raymond. I want him to receive $50 a month for the rest of his life, but I need it to seem like it's coming from a deceased relative's estate or something similar. He'd never accept it if he knew it was from me. Patricia made it happen, creating a story about a distant relative of Helen's who'd left money for Ray in recognition of how well he'd cared for her during her illness. When Ray called me crying about the windfall, saying he could finally fix the shop's roof and maybe take a vacation, I had to pretend to be surprised. Helen would be so happy, he kept saying. She always worried about me being alone and struggling. It's like she's still looking out for me. I also arranged for Terrence's daughter to receive a merit scholarship that would cover her entire college education. Terrence called me excitedly to share the news, never suspecting my involvement. These secret acts of kindness felt better than any purchase I could make for myself. I realized that having money wasn't about accumulating things, but about having the power to change lives, especially for those who deserved it. 3 months after winning the lottery, I finally made another decision. I quit my construction job, telling everyone I'd found a position with a nonprofit focused on veterans housing. It was partially true. I'd started a foundation doing exactly that, funded by my lottery winnings but structured to look like it had multiple donors. At my farewell lunch, Mitchell had the audacity to take credit for mentoring me and preparing me for this next step. I simply smiled, knowing that the foundation's first project would be converting one of Preston's stalled developments into affordable housing, which I'd acquire through a shell company at a price that would hurt but not ruin him. I moved out of my townhouse into a modest but comfortable home in a quieter neighborhood. Nothing flashy, just solid and well-built, with a workshop where Ray could come work on project cars with me. I traded the dying Honda for a reliable Toyota Tacoma, practical but new. These changes were small enough to attribute to my new job but significant enough to improve my daily life. The family barely noticed. They were too relieved that I'd stopped asking for help to question my apparent recovery. Only Ray commented, saying he was proud of me for landing on my feet. You deserve good things, Dom. You've always put everyone else first. 6 months later, at another family dinner, Preston was complaining about the mysterious buyer who'd forced him to sell the riverside property at a loss. Naomi's boutique had suddenly lost its lease when the building was sold to another anonymous buyer who had other plans for the space. Gerald's insurance company faced an investigation after an anonymous tip about fraudulent practices, costing him his position. I sat quietly, eating my mother's dry chicken, feeling no satisfaction but also no guilt. I hadn't ruined anyone. They still had their homes, their savings, their opportunities. I'd simply leveled the playing field a bit, redistributing karma as I saw fit. "It's like someone's targeting us," Naomi complained. "First Dom loses his job, then all this happens to us. Maybe it's the universe," I suggested, echoing Sylvia's earlier words to me. "Maybe you're all vibrating at a frequency of lack." The look on her face was almost worth the months of deception. 1 year after that scratched lottery ticket changed everything. I sat on my back deck with Ray and Terrence, watching the sunset over the mountains. Ray's inheritance had transformed his life. He looked healthier, happier, more at peace than I'd seen him since Helen passed. Terrence's daughter had just been accepted to her dream college, fully funded by her mysterious scholarship. "Life's funny," Ray said, nursing a beer. "Sometimes when you think you've lost everything, the universe finds a way to show you what really matters." "True that," Terrence agreed. "Like when Dom's company went under. Seemed like the worst thing ever, but look at him now. Running a nonprofit, actually making a difference." I smiled, thinking about the irony. My family still didn't know about the lottery. They occasionally asked how my nonprofit paid so well, but they were too self-absorbed to dig deeper. The monthly family dinners had stopped after Gerald lost his job. My mother claimed they couldn't afford to host anymore, though I knew better. Preston had bounced back, as guys like him always do, but with a bit less swagger. Naomi had closed her boutique and taken a regular job, complaining constantly on social media about the unfairness of life. Dennis had actually gotten clean, though I suspected it had more to do with running out of people to borrow from than any personal revelation. My father never called again after that last conversation. Theodore still sent his annual Christmas card with a newsletter about his investment wisdom. Sylvia had moved to Sedona to pursue her spiritual journey, which I'd heard meant living in a van and selling crystals to tourists. But Ray, Terrence, and a handful of others who'd shown their true colors, they were my real family now. The money had given me the power to help them without their knowledge, to be their guardian angel while they continued to be mine through simple friendship and loyalty. As we sat in comfortable silence, Ray suddenly spoke up. "You know, Dom, I always suspected there was more to your story about the company investigation." My heart skipped, but I kept my face neutral. "What do you mean?" He turned to me with a knowing smile. "Companies under FBI investigation don't usually let employees start nonprofits with their names attached. And that nonprofit of yours seems awfully well-funded for something so new." He held up his hand as I started to speak. "I'm not asking questions. I figure if there's something to know, you'll tell me when you're ready. Just wanted you to know that whatever your story is, I'm grateful you're in my life." Terrence nodded. "Same here, man. We all got our secrets. What matters is who shows up when it counts." We clinked our beers together. 3 men who understood that wealth wasn't measured in dollars but in the bonds you forge when you have nothing to offer but yourself. The lottery had given me $52 million, but the real fortune was learning who deserved to share in that blessing. Some people show you their true colors when you're at your lowest. Others reveal themselves when they think you have nothing to give. But the rarest ones, the true treasures, are those who treat you the same whether you're broke or rich, struggling or successful. Money doesn't change people. It just reveals who they really were all along. Have you ever discovered someone's true character during a crisis? What did that moment teach you about loyalty and family? Share your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe for more real stories about the choices that define us. And remember, sometimes the greatest wealth is knowing who truly deserves a place in your life. Thank you for listening, and may you find the wisdom to recognize real love when it shows up, not when it's convenient, but when it costs something to give.